Hey everyone, this is Tara. How are you? We're going to get started today. We're going to use this piece that was included in your box. So you want to gather that up. And then the first thing that we're going to do, excuse me, is we're going to paint this with the medium green color. So we've got the dark green and the light green and then the mix of the two. So go ahead and get started by giving this a coat of paint. And that'll give everybody an extra minute or two to get here if they plan on joining. And then we'll get started with the dotting. While you're working on that, or maybe you're already finished with that, the other thing that you're going to want to get started is everybody got a little bottle this month and it came empty because I didn't want it to squish out on you. But what you're going to want to do is put your gold paint. First, definitely shake up your gold paint really well because it will separate. But you want to get your gold paint in here. So you just want to untwist the top. And the easiest way to do it is to kind of pour it so that it drips right down the middle. If you get a lot of buildup around the edges, it might clog on you and be kind of hard to fill. But this is how we're going to get those gold edges. This is called a fine liner bottle, and you can use this with different colors. These are fairly inexpensive to find on Amazon or at craft stores, but you can put different colors in them. But today we're going to use the gold in here, and that's one of our steps. So you want to go ahead and get this. You don't have to fill it all the way to the top, but fill it at least halfway, and we're going to use this today. So I'll give everybody a few minutes to do that as well. Today we are only going to be using the 3 greens and the yellow, so you do not need your orange, you do not need your black. I've got a couple paint boogers going on, so I'm just going to pull those out before I get started. All right, so we just need our basic set of dotting tools for this. And we are going to start with our blue tool. This is the 8mm rod and some yellow paint. And in the very center, we are going to dot our center dot. And you should, after you have your medium green paint on here, you should be able to see your lines through the paint a little bit. And we're going to use those lines as guides today. And in the center here, you have a flower. And I'm going to use the blue dotting tool on the large end of the blue tool with the light green paint, the lightest color. And I am going to walk the dots down each side of the petals. So I'm going to redip after each line, and I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And then redip, and I'm going to go down the other side of the petal, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to do this for each petal all the way around the circle. And when you're doing this, you don't want to cover up that line. We're going to cover up our lines with our gold paint when we get to that. So leave a little space. Don't dot right directly on your line. We're filling in the empty space with our dots today. For the next step, we're going to switch to the darkest color of paint. I pretty much use the middle color for the background only, so I'm going to go ahead and cover that up. But I'm going to use my purple rod at 6mm, and I'm going to dip into the darkest green. And in between each petal, there is a little dip. Again, I'm going to leave some room so that I can put an outline in there with the gold pen later. But in between each petal, I'm going to add a darker green dot. I'm going to do one of those all the way around, so we will end up with 8. What I'm going to do with each of these dots is I'm going to turn them into petals. So if you look on your guide here, step 2, we're going to walk the dots around both sides of the petals. Now I'm working a little bit on a slightly smaller scale than I had when I created my sample. So I am going to, on my sample, I use the green stylus with the large end to start with. I'm going to switch to the blue stylus because I need to go a little bit smaller. And it might depend on your placement. If you've got room enough, you think to add 2 rows of dots, you can use the green, but I'm going to switch to the blue just because I feel like I've got less space here. So I'm going to go through, and on each of these dots, I'm going to add 2 rows of walking the dots, but I want my center dots there first. So I'm going to use the large end, and I'm going to create 2 center dots, and I'm going to go around and do that for every one, and then I'll walk the dots on each side. So for each circle, just add a dot and then another dot with the large end of your green, or I'm sorry, the large end of your blue stylus. So I've got those 2 dots next to each circle, and then on each side, I'm going to walk the dots. So I'm going to switch to my smaller end. And I'm going to add 4 dots, and then a set of 5 dots. And remember, when we walk the dots, we dip before we walk, but we don't re-dip until you start another row. So I'm going to do all of my right sides. I like to do all of the right and then go around and do all of the left, but we're doing both sides, so whatever works for you. And it worked out for me that the first row, I was able to dot 4. So it ends up with the center dot being 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then with the second row, I was able to walk 5 dots. So it ended up being 6 with that center row. But again, do what works for you. It's going to depend on your spacing. So I've got all of one side. Now I'm going to go back in and do the same thing on the other side. And so that'll create a petal around each large dot there. Right, we're moving on to step 3 on the guide. For step 3, we are going to use, and this is not pictured, but we're going to use the purple rod. That's the 6mm, and I'm going to use the light green paint. And we're going into the next row, and we're going to add, in this row of petals here, we're going to add 1 light green dot close to the tip of each petal. Remember not to get too close to that carved in edge, because we are going to add some gold line on there. Remember to dip in between each dot, and we're going to go all the way around with the purple rod. then the second part of our step 3 is to use our gold bottle. And if you want to practice with this a little bit, you can pull out some paper and just do a few doodles. But basically, this just works like a little tube of paint, and you want to lightly draw lines with it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go over the lines from the center all the way out to this third row of petals. And the reason why I'm doing this on this step is because as we work farther out, it becomes harder to do these because you're going to put your hand in some of these dots. If you want to wait until your piece is completely finished with dots, let it dry, and then go back in with the gold paint, you can absolutely do that. But I have it written out this way. So I'm going to follow the guide here, and I'm just going to start by going around these center petals, following the line that's burnt into the design. And this will kind of hide that line for you. And I don't really thin out this gold paint. This Decoart 24 karat that was in your box is one of my favorite gold paints. So I use it as is. Put it right into the bottle. And take your time with this part. There's no reason to rush. So I'm just going to do the first 3 rows. And then we're going to do some more dots, and then we'll do the final 3 rows. For the next step on these petals, I'm going to use my green stylus, the large end, and I'm going to add a swoosh on each side of these dots here. Now, I wanted to do the outline first because that gives me kind of a guide of where to put these. And so next to each large dot, I'm going to dip and swoop, and then dip and swoop. And I'm going to follow those around every petal. And sometimes when I do my swoops, they don't all turn out even, so I can go back and use the smaller end to adjust some of those. Some days I'm better about my swoops than others. In the next row, I'm going to use my blue rod, which is 8 millimeters, and the yellow paint. And we've got these diamond shapes on the end of each of these petals. And in the center of that, I'm going to add one yellow dot. And we will end up with 8 of those. And then on each part of the diamond, so the bottom part of the diamond, we've already got something, but on the top and the left and the right, I'm going to add a dot, and I'm going to use my green stylus. Now look at your spacing. If you've got room for a larger dot, you can put a larger dot on each of the 3 sides. If you've got room for a smaller dot, you can put a smaller dot on each of the 3 sides. So again, use your best judgment when it comes to the spacing. But we're going to add 1, and I'm using the dark green paint. We're going to add 1, 2, 3. And again, I'm going to stay within the lines because we're going to go back through with the gold. And then we're going to work our way around and do that for all 8 of those yellow dots. All right, we're going to move on to the next row. And so for this step, I'm going to use this yellow rod. This is 12 millimeters. And what I did on my sample is right next to that diamond shape, I added a dot right there. Now this is slightly different from this, and so we can approach this 2 ways. You get to kind of decide how you do it. You can put your dot on that line right here, and then we can put one kind of in that little dip from the octagon there, right next to each set of the yellow diamonds. The other option, if you wanted to follow this line with your gold paint, is to go down a size, and you could use your 10 millimeter pink rod, and you could put the dot kind of on the inside of that shape, which is what I'm going to do just because you have both options visually. So this will be on your step-by-step guide if you want to follow that exactly. And because this is slightly different, I'm going to do it with the pink one just to show you what that looks like. Um, and it'll just be a slight variation, but both designs will work. All I did with this one, this was my sample, so I had to turn this into a carving, and that's why it's a little different. Um, so I just wanted to explain. I didn't mess it up so much as it's sometimes it's hard just to translate what I do into the lines on the cutter. So I'm going to go down to my pink, which is the 10 millimeter, and I'm going to use the dark green paint, and I'm going to add a dot, oops, right in the center there. And once I have that dot, we're going to pull this into a teardrop shape. So I'm going to add just a little more paint with my tool, and then I'm just going to go to this little tip on my blue stylus tool here, and I'm going to pull that into a pin shape right down to that point, and then kind of fill it in. So just guide the paint into the shape that you want. And it's the same step whether you use the large pink tool or the larger yellow tool. Okay, we're still making this into that pointed shape. And I'll hold both up just so you can kind of see the comparison there. And then whichever one you decide to do, we're going to do it all the way around. So for each of these little teardrop shapes around the edge, we're going to add in a little teardrop. And it's the dark green paint, whichever size circle you pick, and then you pull it into that teardrop shape with your stylus. All right, for the next step, again, you're going to have to adjust this depending on which version you did. So here on my sample, I used my purple rod, 6 millimeter, and I did 3 large dots. And then I used this green stylus, the large end, and I dotted into the point. So that's the next step here. Um, Again, I might have to modify the design just a little bit to fit into the space because this is slightly different from this. So I'm going to do one large dot with my green. I'm sorry, green. I looked right at this purple and I called it green. I'm going to use the light green with the purple rod, and I'm going to put one larger dot up here in the corner because I have the space. Now, if you don't have the space, go down a size. Use your green stylus on the large end and have that be the size dots that you use. It's okay to modify the design to fit in your space. But I'm going to add one purple rod size dot with the light green all the way around on each side of my teardrop. And then once you get the largest dots on your pattern, what you're going to do is walk those dots down to that point. So I'm going to use the green stylus, the large end, and just walk those dots down to the little tip of that teardrop. And if you need to use the smaller end, use the smaller end. Do what works for your piece. Remember to redip before each line, but not before each dot.
Tara, we don't do the dot at the tip of the teardrop? No,
I just walked the dots down. If you want to add a dot at the tip, you can.
it's not going to mess up the how it's supposed to look.
No. On my sample here,
Oh yeah, I see it
on this
there.
one, I walked it down to the tip.
Okay.
But this one, I didn't. Like this one here just kind of ended without one, but you can add one on the tip. Like if you did one side, like let's say you did 5 on one side, but you did 6 on this one and just ended in the tip.
Okay.
And then I'm going to continue using my green stylus on the large end, but I'm going to dip into the dark green paint. And on each side of these petals here, we have these little curved areas. And I'm going to add 2 dots. I'm going to dip before each dot. And I'm going to kind of find the center. And I'm going to add 2 dots in each section. And I'm going to do that all the way around. So what it's going to look like is a set of 4 dots between each petal. And what we're going to do is we're going to add swipes on each side of those, but I'm putting those center dots down first. All right, for the next step, once you get all of those dots all the way around, we are going to swoop and swipe. So I'm going to switch to the smaller end. And then for each section, I'm going to have 2 swoops upward and then 2 swipes downward. And I'm going to curve, I'm going to keep these swoops kind of in the shape that you're working with. So if you follow the first design on the sample and you're going beyond the lines, you can kind of, your swoops on each side will be the same. If you want to stay within the pattern, my swoops on the top are a little smaller. Remember to redip between each one. And then just slowly work your way around the piece. That's a little time consuming. Once you finish that, if you're following along on the guide, we're moving to step 9. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start filling in these lines again with my fine liner bottle. So take your time and follow along each set of lines. And that will also take a few minutes. So whenever you're ready, start working on that. So for this step, I am doing every line. So I'm going to go all the way out to my edges with this design. I'm fixing a little paint boo-boo. This is not part of the steps. All right, so I'll give everybody a minute to finish that part, and then we'll move on. All right, for the next step, we're going to make these fun little flowers. And I've been experimenting a lot, kind of on my own time, trying to make not just patterns, but recognizable pieces of the patterns. And so I like these little pansies, and they're super easy to do. And so for the pansy, all you have to do, I use the purple rod, the 6 millimeter, and then in the space around the edge where the two dark green designs meet, there's kind of a little bit of space in here. And so we're going to create 3 dots. And the way that I do it, I'm going to use the dark green paint, purple tool. So I'm going to follow this line all the way out to the edge, and the bottom part of my pansy flower goes right there on the edge. And then I'm going to go back and add 2 more dots that touch this one closer to the edge. So they might overlap slightly, and that's fine. They kind of look like Mickey Mouse ears. And so I'm going to go all the way around and add my little Mickey Mouse ears, and it's just 3 dots, and you redip each time. And they go in this little space where everything kind of meets up here in the middle. And so after you get those set of 3 dots all the way around, there should be 8 of them. The next step is to add the little, and these are just swipes. They're just like the little green parts of the leaves. That would be the flowers. And so this is just a short, quick little swipe. I use the green stylus tool. You can also use the blue if you want them a little smaller. But I use the light green paint, and they don't have to be the same because these are kind of just organic little bits and pieces. You want them to be similar, but they don't have to be exactly the same. But on each side, I just went through and added a little pool. 1, 2, and just kind of work your way around and add a little fun little flourish. 1, 2. From here on out, most of the design is top dots. And I like to encourage you to kind of be creative with the way that you do top dots, but I'll go through how I added my top dots. Um, on the center here, on basically on the yellow dots, I went back through and I added a dark green dot. Our yellow dots here were with our blue stylus, so you could go down one size and use your purple stylus, or you could go a little bit smaller and use the green stylus, the large end. Um, so I'm going to go through and I'm going to add a dark green dot here in the center. Make sure when you top dot that the previous layer is dry enough before you complete that, and be careful of everything around your edges that is still wet. So wherever I had yellow, I'm going to add one of these dark green top dots. Excuse my dog slurping on his water, if you can hear that. He doesn't have manners. In a minute, he's going to come over here and wipe his beard on my leg. To add a second layer on the flowers, what I did was I used the green stylus, and where the flowers meet in the middle, we had 3 large dark green dots. I'm going to use the large end of my green stylus to add 3 yellow dots, and they all meet in the middle. So if your paint here is still wet, give this a minute or come back to it if you need to, because you don't want your paint to mix. But we're going to add 3 dots in the center. And then when that's dry, I go back and I add a dark green dot on top. So I'm going to go around and add each of these. I went back to, after I finished those, I went back to the yellow bits from earlier. So on these spaces here, I added a light green top dot. Also here in the centers of these, I added a dark green top dot. And then here, where the dark green top dots are, I added a light green top dot. So if you're looking at your guide, it is step 13. So I'll work from the inside out. Since these are dry, I can go ahead and top dot those. I'm just using my green stylus, the large end. Remember, with top dots, it's really your preference. So feel free to change up the colors. You don't have to put them in the same places. You really can make this design your own. On these light green petals here, I add a dark green top dot. Out here on these yellow and green bits, I'm going to add a light green top dot. Now these are still slightly wet for me, so I'm going to be careful. They don't always work so well if they're wet. I think I'll be okay, but you never know. If in doubt, wait a little bit. I cheated a little with mine just for the sake of the video because we're going kind of long here. So in the center of my little flowers, I add a dark dot in the middle. Again, Again, you want that to be a little bit dry before you do that. And that's what gives it that flower look. And then the last thing I did was on these large teardrops, I added a light top dot. And so, depending on what size you use for your teardrops, I use my pink stylus for these big teardrops. So, I'm going to go down a size to the blue. You could even go down 2 sizes to the purple. If you use the yellow, you've got 3 options. But I added a top dot in the center. Now, what I did on my sample is I just left it as a dot. If you wanted to, you could pull that into a smaller teardrop. That would be another design option. And since I kind of flubbed on this one, I'm going to go ahead and pull it into a teardrop just to show you what it looks like anyway. So you could just leave it as a dot, which is what it looks like here. And I like that look. Or you can use your stylus, and just like you did with that dark green on the background, you could pull it into a teardrop. Again, you want to make sure it's dry underneath before you do that. So those are 2 options for that final step. And that is the Southwest Vibes Creative Challenge design.